How's it going, you wonderful people? Welcome to our DIY guide on building a covered deck from scratch. In this video, we'll take you through each step of the process, from digging the post holes to adding the finishing touches. Now, I know that this video is going to get the attention of the 30-year in the industry deck builders saying that their way of building a deck is the only way to do it, but I don't mind battling it out with them in the comment section down below. This is only how I was taught, and now I'm teaching whoever wants to watch this video. If you have a better method, please make a video about it and correct me. If not, then I don't really care to hear about your opinion. Let's get into it. Okay, so first things first, I have to dig the post holes and get my cover set up. And what I ended up doing was a lean-to welded cover. What that means is that the cover leans onto the pre-existing area. And what I am doing is digging my post holes, but before I can dig my post holes, I have to use my string lines to make sure that everything is squared off. Unfortunately, I didn't take a video of how I used the string lines to square everything off, but I will leave a link up in the upper right corner or in the description down below by a YouTuber called Essential Craftsman, who goes into deep detail on how to use string lines, so shout out to him. I buried my 4" by 4" square tubing 4 feet, and they are going to stick out about 12 feet from the ground. As you can see here, I'm showing you my stakes and my string lines to show you that everything is squared off. Obviously that one piece of square tubing hasn't been set in concrete yet, so it's not squared. This one is squared off, and it is also level on both sides. There it is in concrete. I had to use a rock to hold it still. Here it is lined up with the pre-existing 4x4 square tubing. And back to the time lapse. Here I am setting that other 4" by 4" square tubing in concrete. And it was hot this day, man. It was like 120 degrees outside. Well, actually it was like 98, but the Texas humidity made it feel like 120. In this clip you can see that I started digging my post holes for the wooden posts for the wooden framing, but in the middle of doing that I started thinking to myself that I could really use some shade. So I decided to build a lean-to cover before continuing with any digging. The first step in building the cover was to weld my clips into place. The reason I'm welding clips into place is so that I have something to weld onto when it comes to putting in my C-purlin. If you don't know what clips or C-purlin are, then let me put it in simple terms. The clips are simply, quite literally, just a piece of steel that is pre-cut for you, which you can buy at your local metal shop. The ones I'm using are 4" by 6" by 3/16 inches thick, and the C-purlin is a piece of metal that can be used as a rafter. They are much stronger than your regular wooden rafters, and for some people they are more aesthetically pleasing.
I saw you laughing through the tears as you slowly slipped away. I watched you go. I thought you should know.
And here in the center of our structure, you can see that we are running a piece of rectangular tubing. It is a piece of 2 by 6 rectangular tubing, and we could have used an I-beam, but instead we decided to do rectangular tubing because it wasn't going to be supporting a whole bunch of weight. If it would have been supporting more weight, we would have used a piece of I-beam, but since it wasn't, we decided to go with the rectangular tubing. You might be asking why we don't use rectangular tubing as the rafters as well, and that is simply because it's not really necessary, and rectangular tubing is way more expensive. So we put it up to measure, and then we are going to cut it. And then in the next clip, I didn't get a clip of me welding it onto place, but it's going to be welded into place, and then we will weld the welding clips onto both sides of that center piece.
Lay you in the grave and I can barely recognize you in your fragile state. No more signs of depression from a long time ago. I throw in a pretty flyer as they slowly laid you low. It was a rose.
Now that all the clips were welded into place, it was time to put on our C-purlin. The way we did it was we cut the C-purlin to size. We started with the very front ones first, welded those two into place to make sure that everything was squared off at the top, and then we started welding in the ones in the center. The way we did it is I would cut the piece, my friend Jonathan would come over and pick those up, hold it in place, and then I would clamp 2 into place at the same time. That way I could weld them all once they were being held by the clamps. It made things move a lot faster, and I was using my wire welder on this because my stick welder was having problems. After all the C-purlins were welded into place, I came back with a spray painter and I started spraying all the hard to reach spots. And then after I got done spraying with the spray painter, I started rolling on the paint. What I was using was Valspar oil-based paint for metal buildings. Once I finished painting, I let that dry for about 4 hours, and then I came back later that afternoon with my friend Ephraim, who helped me put on that sheet metal. Luckily, since it was a 16-foot span, we just had to order 16-foot pieces and they fit right in. We didn't have to do any cutting for that. We put those in and then fastened them down with the self-drilling screws and the lap screws. I came back early the next morning to set in my wooden posts. As you can see, my string line has already been ran and all of my post holes have been dug. So what I am doing is I am setting my wooden posts into place with concrete, and I am making sure that they are level and squared off. The reason I am putting these posts in the ground is so I can put my beams on top of the posts. Some people like to do the beams on the side of the posts, and I understand the arguments for both. I mean, either way will work. Some people will argue that if you put the beams on top of the posts, they're more likely to sway, but I haven't noticed that to be the case, and hopefully I will not notice that to be the case. They're meant to last at least 20 years, so I guess I'll update you guys in 20 years whether or not that was the proper way to do it. But anyways, you can see me here leveling off where I need to make my cuts on these wooden posts that are in the ground. And what I am doing is I'm running the string line so I can make sure that it's level, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut each one to the size that I need it in order for the beam to sit on it properly. In this clip, you can see that all of my posts have been cut down to size, and I am putting on that galvanized piece of metal to hold it in place. On the outside beams, I went ahead and bolted it to the post instead of on the posts. That way I could have a mixture of one being bolted to and one being bolted on. You can see my method of connecting the beams here. And I put a metal plate at each spot where the beams are butted up against each other. That's pretty much it for the post and beams. Next, I went ahead and started marking my 16-inch on centers with my measuring tape, and after that I went ahead and started putting in my joists. Now, when putting in my joists, I used a specific fastener to hold those down. I'll put a picture of that here up on the screen now. And I also used hurricane ties. Depending on where you are in the US, hurricane ties may or may not be code. I'm in a region where it is not code and it's not required, but if you live closer to the coast in Texas, I believe that in a lot of those regions, it is definitely code. It also depends on how far away you are from the coast, because as the name implies, hurricane ties basically help hold everything together during strong winds and weather, etc. I use them anyways just because I like to be safe and not sorry. Okay, so now that all of the joists are in, it's time to install the decking boards. The way I like to do it is I like to build a border around the decking boards whenever the decking boards aren't the full length of the deck. And in this case, the deck was 26 feet long. The decking boards were only 16 feet long, so I decided to build a border to make it all look nice and pretty. A lot of people don't like to do a border. Well, let me take that back. Some people don't like to do a border because it's a little bit more cost efficient to not build a border, but I really think the border makes it look a lot prettier, so I always recommend to build a border. In my situation, I had to find the center of this deck, which was about 13 feet if it's 26 feet long, and I had to put a decking board in the center of it as part of the border, and then one on the very outside and one at the very front, and then I had to put in my decking boards there in the center of that. I hope that made sense. It made sense in my head. But let me put up some pictures of decks without a decking border and decks with a decking border so you can see the difference between the two. If you have made it this far into the video, thank you for sticking around. If you are interested in seeing how I built the rails for this deck, then go ahead and let me know in the comment section down below. And if you are interested in having me work on your next personal project, then go ahead and reach out to me at any social media at VRDoesIt, or send me an email, vrdoesit@gmail.com. I like to answer those whenever I see them. And if you are interested in watching the part 2 on how I built the rails, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, as I will be releasing that maybe sometime later this month when I get some time away from work. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.